Good evening. Okay. Trish Bodie.
Here.
Gloria Gonzalez Dolokia.
Here.
Alexis Grimes.
Here.
Sade Bashakun. Aaron Johnson.
Here.
Christine Maurer.
Here.
Anna Smith.
Here. All right, board members, it is 6:18 and I declare a quorum present of the special meeting of Leander ISD Board of Trustees. As you'll notice, our agenda is slightly abbreviated this evening. In fact, completely abbreviated. The reason we called this meeting this evening is to discuss our board policy review. We'll be walking through those steps. You'll notice the only other items we have on here is a closed session, board debrief, and then citizen comments. And that is the next item we'll take up on our agenda. So thank you all for joining us in the audience and online. We'll go ahead and ask for our citizens to get ready to come speak. Please note that there are other ways you can communicate with the board, but this agenda item is time set aside for us during this meeting to hear from our community. We are restricted in the ways we can interact with you during this portion of our meeting per our board operating procedures and policy BED local, which state the board shall not deliberate or make decisions regarding any subject that is not on the posted agenda. Therefore, please note, this format is not going to be a conversation. It's not a back and forth discussion. So we'll ask that your comments respect that limitation. And as such, please refrain from directing comments about an individual by name who would not be able to respond. Direct your comments to the board up here. Our board operating procedures enumerate further requests, but I will sum up by saying we encourage polite and professional conduct. Officers have also confirmed with council that I will remind you of our request for polite and professional conduct if it becomes necessary that you need a reminder during your comments. We ask that the audience and those participating help us maintain the decorum of this meeting, and as such, there shouldn't be any outburst or verbal demonstration during citizen comments. And we're now going to call our first speaker, speaker number 1. You'll have up to 3 minutes. Please be aware and watch the timer, so when your time is up, you will hear a chime. Your mic will be cut out shortly after. Thank you.
Good evening, board members, Mr. Superintendent. I came tonight and signed up because I want to just give you some community citizen feedback on this process you're going through. I took this weekend and went through all the documents, and I've got some general comments I'd like you to consider as you are going through these tonight in your closed session. I could not go through these in detail because there's a lot of documents here, of course. So I'm going to just highlight some key points. The first one is going to be optics. Starting out the very top, your AE local educational philosophy. It's very good change. I agree with the change of consolidating it down, getting it very, very concise, but one optical point to keep in mind. In the abbreviated format, you still got the partnering with families is the last thing considered, just optics. Another area of optics is in your BBG local, where you talk about the traveling expenses. You include per diem and you kind of move away from exact expenses. It's optics when you're going through a difficult time of finances. Just remember the optics you're projecting there. Position in the BBB where you talk about, there's a comment there about considering the restructuring of the position 5 re-election. Once again, optics, just all these things to keep in mind. Go up to your BQA local, which is your planning and decision-making process, district level. A couple of things that just kind of going into areas related to equity. You mentioned in there a desire to institute collaborative decision-making. I think that'd be a great idea. I think it's an area that we lack a lot in a lot of our processes that I'm involved in anyway. I don't think we do enough collaborative deliberating. District-wide Educational and Improvement Council, you mentioned that in that same policy. Composition diversity, this caught my eye immediately. It's kind of a central thread. When we focus on diversity, what we usually wind up with is the opposite. If you choose me for something because I'm black, that's the opposite of diversity. That's racist. That BQA local, the planet, another related to that, BBF, which is apparently your model you're going to be following based on the TASB standard using the ethics acronym. I really enjoyed reading that, but a couple of areas I want to point out again related to equity. I'd encourage you all to read it and really think through it, really the words that are in it. A couple I want to highlight: equity and attitude, making decisions for the benefit of all students, not focusing on the needs of any one group to the exclusion of others, and encouraging different opinions and then listening. Those are words in that policy that jumped out to me, and I just encourage you to take those words at heart. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, speaker number 1. Speaker number 2.
Good evening. I didn't really have anything prepared, but I showed up. And so many citizens and parents ask how are porn books allowed in LASD, if they're paying attention, when if legal, the state policy makes this an illegal act for children if we were to use the model of if legal, if this board was to use that model. The if local law, which pertains to our district, states this board is responsible for the final approval for the new materials added to the library. And from what we also read, it's the decisions made by the district level library supervisor along with Dr. Gearing. And each item should support and enrich the curriculum or students' personal interest in learning, meeting high standards, artistic elements, be appropriate for the subject area, for the age. So you guys already know this EF local law. I'm just kind of repeating it because I needed something to understand and write. But how is sex for children such a high interest? Students have so many other interests, such as going to school for a great education, sports, crafts, and other great mind-developing hobbies. I mean, since January, you've had a wonderful group of eloquent students come in and just speak about their interests and how to make a contribution to this world. And I don't believe sex was mentioned, so we should really listen to what they're saying and align it with EF local. The Commissioner of Education, Mike Morath of TEA, states in that letter addressed to Abbott that the school boards are more than able to adopt policies that TEA models to address the pornographic books and remove what is not appropriate for children. Why can't the TEA or EF Legal be effective in a community where community members are continuously, like myself, asking the board to act and be a great role model for Texas? Even in EF local books such as Red at the Bone, The Nowhere Girls, Lawn Boy, and more violate Texas Penal Code 4324. Again, final call lies in this district. And Code 4324, all material should be appropriate for students describing harmful material whose dominant them taken as a whole may 1, appeal to the interests of a minor in sex, nudity, or excretion. 2, is patently offensive to prevailing standards in the adult community as a whole with respect to what is suitable for minors. And 3, is utterly without redeeming social value for minors. It is an offense in Texas to distribute the material in violation of Texas Penal Code 4324. Finally, collection development policies must demonstrate a commitment to compliance with the Children's Internet Protection Act as specified in 47-250.
All right, thank you, speaker. Speaker number 3.
I love a good meeting. Oh, what a good meeting this is. Special meeting on a Tuesday night. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad I'm here. So, special meeting tonight. The agenda talking about looking over things in our policies. What are our policies? You know, I thought we had a pretty good policy for years. The kids have been graduating over and over again, top-notch grades, and then we keep wanting to align with TASB. The director for a nonprofit makes over $1 million a year, so that to me says it's not much of a nonprofit. It's more like a profit and a lobbyist firm for the school boards because they're not actually attached to the TEA. So being aligned with what they want is not in our school district's best interest. And I'm sure you guys will get to that a little bit more later, but the fact is, we don't need to change anything. The policies are fine the way they are. The school is here to help the kids to be their best, and there isn't much more to it than that. There really isn't, and that's in the policy. And I really don't have much more to say to that, but since I have a minute 30, I'll just talk to you anyway. So about a year ago, I asked you guys to get rid of those books, and you didn't. You still haven't, and I still wonder why. Why? Because there's no policy. Oh, I'm sorry. There is a policy, but like the policy that's already written that we're talking about tonight, that other policy doesn't have a way for the parents to have rights. And the way I'm looking at the new policy, or the design policy of this new policy, if I'm saying policy too much, I apologize. But the policy is still trying to look to take away more parents' rights, and we're trying to get them back. Because as parents, you guys used to come out here and talk to us. You guys don't do that anymore. How come? There's only like 10 of us here tonight. Maybe you should ask why we're here. Maybe you could find out from the community who keeps showing up to the meetings. Maybe you don't want to know because maybe you already know. You have an agenda of your own. I don't know. I've been wanting to ask that simple question, why? And no one wants to answer it. Why? Why are you doing this? Why would you want to change policy? The policy has been working for years, decades. I've talked to people back in 1990s who graduated from Leander, and they said, I had a pretty solid education. I'm an owner of a business. I'm worried about my kid because my kid has trouble reading, and then they're in the 8th grade. Why would an 8th grader have trouble reading? That's the question. Why? I want to know.
All right. Thank you, speaker number 3. Speaker number 4. Speaker number 4, if you can press the button on the mic so we can hear you. No.
Hello, my name is Jessica Joy. Thank you so much, Board and Trustees. As you may remember, if you were here the last little meeting we had, I am a pornography industry survivor that went to the nation's top sex trafficking recovery, with a 95% success rate of girls not returning to exploitation. So I went over how I am very familiar with being broken from my constitution of myself and my identity. I can't even imagine the kids going through a new identity at the top of every single hour. What we do have in common is that we don't want to see these children broken. I believe that we can come together over that. So what does this have to do with the agenda in the budget? Of how can we stand back and look at these children that we don't want them broken? We invite the sex trafficking movement to come in and educate the teachers on what does the sexual grooming process look like. We educate the students to recognize grooming. We educate the parents in the community on recognizing. Why am I bringing that up? Why do I think that that's a huge solution that the budget should consider? I'm saying this because New York City ended qualified immunity. There is precedent where the cities are now being pushed to end qualified immunity. In my hand, I have affidavits for parents to fill out. New York City, I encourage you to look at how much they have spent on settlements and suits. What the process was of yanking the local budget and putting it back with stipulations like, we will investigate these complaints. Imagine these complaints fully filled out by parents, that if this indoctrination had not taken place, which there is a precedent for indoctrination, their kid wouldn't be self-identifying as a cat or a dog or a chair or a houseplant tomorrow. Consider the affidavits when you look at the budget. Consider the cost of destroying a child's life and messing with who they are. I used to roll around a suitcase and I would walk in on porn sets And I'd say, you tell me who I'm going to be today. You tell me. I just beg for them. You tell me who my identity is. So I know what it's like to be isolated, semi-isolated, group isolated, repeat. And I've seen that our government studied that on children until they failed to thrive. I thought that was weird that that was with a legislative narrative that had to do with our county health departments. Why would they be studying child suicide? That was weird. Make the right choice. Save yourselves a lot of money so the parents don't have to fill these out and ring out the territory. They will. If not now, when will they? They will. Trust me, it's Texas.
All right, thank you, Speaker. Before we have our next speaker come up, I'll remind our citizens that our agenda item for this evening will be board policy review. So we're going to be discussing our board policy review. We'll ask at your citizen comments on special meetings. Please make sure you keep that focus in your remarks. With that, speaker number 5. Okay, speaker number 6.
Hi, I'm speaking before you today as your typical domestic terrorist. I want to provide comments regarding this evening's agenda item and some of the proposed policy changes from TASB, an organization that has yet to sever ties to the National School Board Association after the infamous letter to the DOJ. According to financial records that I received from a PIR, in 2018 and 2019 and 2020, LISD sent about $30,000 to TASB. Why did this jump up to $48,000 in 2020-2021? I think considering LISD's inability to manage a $400 million budget, all the domestic terrorists out there deserve to know what LISD gets for $50,000. If I recall correctly, wasn't it TASB recommendations that removed parental involvement from the medical policy LISD was looking to update in May of 2021? Those proposed TASB edits would have allowed LISD staff to remove a child from campus for a medical procedure without notifying a parent. So I guess you can understand why I'm skeptical of the current proposed edits you're reviewing today. I would think that if there were any policy edits, that LISD would be interested in making sure EF was in compliance with HB 1525 requirements by removing the newly added language under the selection criteria that states instructional material could contain sensitive content, including sexuality, violence, and profanity. According to HB 1525, parental consent is required prior to any curriculum about sexuality. There's a list of about 800 unvetted classroom library titles, many of which contain content pertaining to sexuality, which puts you out of compliance with HB 1525. I'm a bit surprised that after all the money marked policy that's paid out to TASB, that compliance with state law is not a priority. Typically, regulations and laws are going to drive policy changes. I do hope that discussion this evening will disclose what new law or regulations justify the removal of the district philosophy in AE and the entire section of principles of ethical behavior. Is the district no longer committed to honesty, integrity, loyalty, fairness, respect of others, law abidance, pursuit of excellence, and accountability, to name a few? Strategic objectives is completely removed. Discipline, character development is completely removed, and facilities to provide a safe, secure, and comfortable facility conducive to productivity and learning is removed. What's the purpose of dismantling the current educational philosophy? If you don't want a policy documenting that LISD is committed to providing safe and secure facilities conducive to productivity and learning, then what sort of facilities are you expecting to provide with the newly adopted vision and mission statements? Thanks.
All right, thank you, Speaker. Speaker number 7.
I came here tonight because TASB is here to help you with your local policy updates. My number one question is, why wasn't the EF legal language that states books and materials can be removed that are pervasively vulgar not adopted into the Leander ISD local policy? There already is a law for obscene material in schools, but this body chose not to include it into their local policy. Why? There is a case in New York State that should set precedents here. Board of Education versus PICO, which states that pervasively vulgar books may be excluded from the public school libraries and it doesn't violate anyone's First Amendment rights. We have some amazing teachers and staff in Leander ISD, but we also have some activist teachers that have found a way around these policies. Why are parents the only ones being forced to review the materials, and why are some of these obscene books still showing up on district campuses? Well, I have the answer for you. At the beginning of the year, Reagan Elementary PTA asked teachers for their wish list, and many included books. Another way in when books are donated to classroom libraries or schools that are not vetted. They don't get vetted. Reagan Elementary has what is called the Star Book Cafe, where they do book tastings. While this should be a fun and exciting event, one fourth grade teacher in particular used this wish list to ask for inappropriate books, and the PTA bought the books she requested even after a parent vocally disagreed. The book in particular is called Ban This Book. It tells the school of a young black girl who fights back against hated white PTA president who's removing objectionable books from the school library. The book completely vilifies the concerned mother and calls her the parent of the despised classmate. Do the parents of Reagan Elementary know that their PTA funds are going towards this? The LASD employee handbook states, LASD employees should never use their position and access to students to spread their personal messages to students. Employees should also keep in mind that parents expect that employees will allow the parent to take the lead when talking about non-curricular subjects, including controversial and personal matters. HB 3979 especially states that the teacher must explore such issues and contending perspectives without giving deference to one particular perspective. While all of the books that this particular teacher requested to discuss with her 10-year-old students on one side depiction of sensitive issues like race, sexuality, and gender. Here are a few: Front Desk, Blended, and Harbor Me all include brutality by white police officers against people of color. Let the Children March and Act encourage children to be activists. Let me remind you, Texas Penal Code section 4321 about criminal obscenity states, a person commits an offense if, knowing its content and character, he or she promotes or possesses with intent to promote any obscene material. Please stop this nonsense and clean up our schools. Our children do not need the distraction of political activists in our school. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Speaker number 7. Speaker number 8. Speaker number 8. One more time. No, you got it. Is it going? Yes. Okay. Oh, okay. My first time, as you can see. Tonight, this special meeting addresses training for trustees. As I reviewed some of the online resources, the first thing I see under educational philosophy is a vision statement that has no basis in reality. It does not apply to LISD students and their success in life, but to, quote, sought-after creators of our future world, a phrase that may need a linguistics master to interpret. Next, I see a mission statement defined by Merriam-Webster as something that states the purpose or goal of an organization. That has nothing to do with providing education as a basis for becoming a contributing member of American society. I see removal of 10 ethical principles of behavior, some of which should be emphasized in our schools: honesty, integrity, respect for others, law abidance, pursuit of excellence, accountability. I believe that our school districts should build from the bottom up on policies, knowing what teachers and children need to be educated for real life, and the ethics necessary to work with and around others, and tangible outcomes of math, reading, science, and history to learn to not repeat mistakes from past societies. I would ask the board to have training to disassociate with organizations that consider parents domestic terrorists, and training to associate more openly with local parents wanting effective education for their children, and partnering with parents by letting parents raise their children with moral and ethical standards from each individual home. I prepared for a minute and a half. Now I have a little bit more time. I concur with speaker number 2 about the results of harmful pornographic material in schools, and with speaker number 3 about principles and policies that have long served the district. My sons graduated here in '79 and '84. They are productive members of society. My grandson is graduating this year
struggling with not much future for himself, not even making his 26 credits to graduate, and has been working with the school district for his education to graduate. And that's a sad statement in my opinion. We also need for the education of the board to include the TASB as you all call it. When I was in the workforce, it was TASB, the EF legal, so that it aligns with, where is it? Federal Codes 18 U.S. Code 1470 and 18 U.S. Code 1466A. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you listen to our comments.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker number 9.
Good evening. First, it's hard to digest the enthusiasm by which the board frequently changes policies, especially considered that when changes are made, the results inevitably do not fulfill or represent fully the original intent. An example is our failed EF local policy. EF legal states that a district may remove materials because they are pervasively vulgar or based solely upon the educational suitability of books in question. EF Local, created from EF Legal, is used when evaluating the appropriateness of materials found in our schools. However, it is rendered ineffective as this EF Legal standard was not incorporated into EF Local. This could have saved the district a lot of time, resources, and loss of trust with the community. Secondly, the butchering of AE Local is astounding considering when it was one of the few documents left with specific, measurable goals and standards. Your revision of the vision statement says nothing. You've eradicated the principles of ethical behavior such as honesty, integrity, fairness, respect, pursuit of excellence, and accountability. These are the very issues that this community has asked for at every meeting, yet go ignored. You've changed our graduate profile into a word salad of nothingness. The sole purpose of your existence as a district and a board is to educate children. Policies are supposed to be clear, actionable, and measurable so they can be followed. So stop complicating policies to fit your vision for the district, a vision that does not accurately reflect the community in which you represent. Get back to the basics so that our kids can pursue academic excellence again. Have a little more time. There were 3 other things that got my attention. I didn't have time to go through every single, or to write everything, so please forgive me if this is off the cuff. These are 3 things that I wanted to see. I know you'll have discussions and it's not a back and forth, but if at some point, I'm sure there's reasons for, I'd like to hear the reasons as to these 3 topics. For BF, there was an emergency adoption. I say there wasn't. There is a proposed emergency adoption of local amendment on what, I want to know what constitutes the emergency. Are there specific situations that would constitute that? The second one is the BBB local, where the election years seem to be off. Maybe there was some confusion or maybe it's a misprint, but it looks like in 2028, all 7 positions will be up, and that doesn't reflect the 4-3 cycle. Also, the BDAA local, I'm curious as to why only the VP position is addressed. I'm sure there's a reason for it. I just don't know why, because it was that they were elected in to become president versus just automatic.
Thank you. Speaker number 10. Speaker number 10.
I have time to say good evening. Good evening. I only have a minute and a half prepared, so this sounds kind of ludicrous to say what I'm about to say. Okay, here we go, because it's usually that short. Okay, it is my firm conviction that 1 minute or even 3 minutes is not nearly enough time to compare and contrast the extreme and negative policy changes Leander ISD is proposing to the educational philosophy of our district. We, the taxpayers and community members of LISD, are gravely concerned about these proposed changes. Not all change is good. As you yourselves have seen in numerous academic performance and progress tests given to LISD students, our children, they are falling behind in academic standing and adeptness to compete in the international marketplace because the LISD is more concerned with data mining and indoctrinating its students. Again, our children and grandchildren, with anti-American, racist, immoral, vile, promiscuous ideologies within the curriculum, and especially through the required readings and discussions in the book clubs in English language arts classes, and now in the instructional materials, as you call them, which also have links that can be updated at a moment's notice by the publishers to include yet more dangerous and anti-American subject matter. Because of this headstrong anti-American ideology the district is pushing on our school children, you can be sure expository information will be disseminated to the taxpayers of Leander ISD concerning these radical changes you are proposing, because they need to know that this leadership, yet again, cannot be trusted to conceptualize and promote the traditional pro-American values, exemplary education, respect for government authorities, and citizenship that most Americans want their children to learn.
All right, thank you. Speaker number 11.
I recently moved back to Texas. I'm originally a Texan, born here and lived much of my life here. We moved out of state because my husband had to get a job. And we moved back on purpose because of the culture that I had grown up with in Texas. The culture of everything that I'm looking at being removed under the vision and the philosophies, the principles of ethical behavior, honesty, integrity, loyalty, fairness, respect for others. And I'm seeing a mission statement that is taking away the detail and putting everything in general terms. Now, I happen to be a business person. When you do that, there's one reason you do that. That is so you can push things through and not have to be accountable to the specific details of whatever you're pushing through. And as a parent, I don't like that when it comes to my child's education. I want my child to learn American culture, Texas culture, which is based on the principles of ethical behavior. When I moved here, I assumed that we were working off of these principles that I grew up with. And then I started hearing whispers from different parents of what was going on. And I didn't believe it. I was shocked, to be honest with you. And then I started coming to the meetings and continuing to talk to different people, and they gave me specific examples of where a policy is not being followed. So when I see these changes going from specific to general, it concerns me, because if we can't have followed the policy the way it was outlined in the specifics, and we're going from that and to a general, that seems a little hinky to me, and I don't like it as a parent. I want you guys to please consider there's a general comeback to any kind of pushback on anything that's being done, that you must be a racist, you must be a white supremacist, you must not care about other people. I am not white, and I am not a racist. I am a Latin American mother of 2 children. I worked myself out of a poverty childhood. And my kids deserve better than this. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, board members, this concludes citizen comments, and now we'll be getting to the much-awaited discussion of our board policy review. Sean, you were going to do the introduction, so I'll cue you up.
Thank you very much, and thank you, trustees, for being here this evening for this very important work. As you all know, we've been engaged with TASB, which is our nonpartisan statewide association that works with school districts all across the state and provides a variety of services, including policy services and policy consulting. We have been working through multiple policies and reviewing them, and the purpose being to ensure that we are aligning policy and practice. And this is my quick nuts and bolts, but our guest will get into that in a lot more detail. And the idea being that if practice doesn't align with policy, then we need to determine, is it the practice that's out of line, or does the policy need to come up to date? Keeping in mind that we've not done a policy review in this district since the year that I graduated from high school. And so I'll let you do the guesswork when Eric introduces some of that. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Eric Narcisse. He's the associate, I want to get this correct, because Assistant Director for Update, Research, and Development in their Policy Services Department at TASB Association of School Boards. Before he gets started, the one thing I'll encourage you to do is this is an interactive process. This works best if you, as the board, are engaging directly with Eric, because what he has in a proposal, that's just a starting place for you to work from. But he needs you to really be engaged and provide feedback in order for this to be a really successful process. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Eric. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Good evening. As Sean mentioned, my name is Eric Narcisse, and I'm Assistant Director in Policy Service at the Texas Association of School Boards. I thought I would just outline what your evening will look like today. Looks like the storms have passed. That's a good thing. But I was just going to take a few moments to talk a little bit about policy service and what we do. Then talk about the policy review process. As Sean mentioned, it's been since 1992 that the district had a comprehensive policy review. And I'll talk about what that means in a minute. Then I'll talk about the framework that we use when we make recommendations regarding your policies. And then we'll dive in to the packet that you have. That's why I'll need information from you to determine what recommendations to make regarding the specific policies. And then if there are any other policies you have questions about, I'll be happy to entertain those as well. Hopefully my PowerPoint works. Perfect. So just a little bit about policy service and what we do. Policy service assists school districts across the state in updating their various policies in their policy manual. If you were to look at any other policy services and any other state associations, the one thing that distinguishes TASB Policy Service from those other state policy service associations or policy service divisions is that we try to localize your specific policy. In those other states, they'll create what would be called a standard policy and send those to districts, and districts are on their own to adapt those to any specific or unique practices for those districts. In TASB Policy Service, we work with the district to determine what your unique practices are that should be reflected in your specific policy. We maintain the policy manuals for 1,022 school districts that range in size from Houston ISD to as small as Divide ISD, which has 30 students in the entire school district. So sometimes the policy we start off with isn't going to fit everybody in that range. So that's why having those conversations with school districts to determine what you do so that it is accurately reflected in your policy is very important. As a policy consultant, I am one of 10, and we are not assigned to regions, so Region 13 is not my region per se. I actually work with districts in the Panhandle, West Texas, on the Gulf Coast, in the Valley, different districts with different needs, and different practices, and that's by design, so that we do not, if we were relegated to a particular region, what tends to happen is districts copy off of each other's policies. So we would be experts at the policies in that region, but having assignments throughout the state gives us that fairly broad breadth of knowledge about what's happening statewide. So that's by design. We're here to help in keeping track of legislative changes that will impact policy, federal rules, state rules that are written that will impact policy, to help administrators focus on the more important and most important part of their job, and that's educating the students in your district. We provide those recommendations by working with TASB Legal Services and working with other divisions in TASB. We also collaborate with some of the state agencies so that we know what is coming down the pipe, so that when the time comes, when those are in effect, there's a little delay. There's always going to be some delay. There's going to be as minimal a delay as possible in getting those changes to the district's board so they can consider those revisions. We each have an assigned policy contact for the districts that we work with. And that individual serves as the gatekeeper in ensuring that things that are brought to the board and adopted, they are communicated to us so that we can ensure that they're updated online for the public to see, okay? So that's just a little bit about what we do in TASB Policy Service. Now about this process. 1992, a lot was happening. I forget what Sean said. He was graduating. I was at the University of Texas in my junior year. And we usually recommend to school districts that they conduct these reviews every 5 to 7 years. Now, the fact that a district has not gone through a comprehensive policy review does not mean that all the policies are out of whack, because Leander has been good about getting policy changes that have been made in the district to us and taking care of the updates that have been sent to the district. So you're taking care of that maintenance that happens 2 to 3 times a year, and then those locally developed updates that come from the district. The policy review is necessary to look at other policies that are not going to get touched in an update, and sometimes might get overlooked in a district because there's a whole lot going on and isn't updated when it should be to align practice and policy. And that's the most important part about this review. It's looking at the policy, talking about the practice, and determining if they're in sync and if they're not. And then it's at that point where a decision has to be made that the policy will be followed from this point forward, or the practice is more efficient. So we need to align the policy to sync up with that. This process started some time ago with a questionnaire. After the district agreed to move forward with the process, a questionnaire was sent to the district. And I always ask districts, respond to this questionnaire based on what your knowledge about the practice is, because what we're trying to do is align policy and practice. So I asked the district to send that to me based on what your knowledge about the practice is. I take those responses and I use those to draft the policies. Some that you have today, and some that were shared with the administrators during the administrative review. Now, the one advantage you have that they didn't is that you don't have to spend 2 days with me walking through all of those policies. They did a lot of the work, and I'm going to talk to you in a minute to explain why that is. Tonight, there are policies in the B section of the manual that I need to get your input on because those impact you directly. And I just want to find out what the practice is. And I've looked at your board operating procedures, and there's some recommendations that are going to be made based on those as well. And that's where we find out if things are not in sync, we can bring them in sync. After this conversation, I'll take everything I've learned from you, everything that I've learned from the administrative team, and I will look at those drafts, make adjustments when necessary, and all of those will come back to the district. And then it's at that point that the district will present those to the board committee. I think you have a policy committee, the board policy committee to look at and vet, and then bring those to the board for your consideration and action. And after that, you send those responses back to me that, yes, accepted as presented, accepted with changes, and allow or bring those changes or send those changes to me, and we'll get everything updated in policy online. And as I told the administrators, you don't have to see me again. Hopefully not for another 30 years, but 5 to 7, 7 being more realistic. So that's a little bit about the process, the policy review process. So I said your policy manual was localized. That means it was created in 1992. And since that time, there's been some significant changes to the education code, some that came 3 years after your policy manual was adopted and created. In 1995, there was a major rewrite of the Ed Code. Very large bill, changed the way that boards were elected, and most importantly, and what will inform our conversations today, the way that boards and superintendents interact, okay? So prior to 1995, in the Education Code, Chapter 11, that deals with the board's ultimate responsibilities, and if you have time and you have nothing else to do on a Friday, go to BAA Legal, and you can read through the board's responsibilities. I see the board president nodding. The board's responsibilities and duties, and that's where you'll find that site. There's a site that talks about the board's responsibility to govern and oversee the management of the school district. Prior to 1995, that actually read the board's responsibility was to govern and manage the public schools of the district. So you see, it was a very small change and a very large bill, but fundamentally changed the way that boards and superintendents interacted. So what the legislature was trying to do back in 1995, and continues to this day, is to clearly define what the board's role is, and that is to govern, provide direction, evaluate outcomes, delegate authority when necessary. Those are all governing responsibilities. And a lot of that is accomplished through your board policy, okay? And then that meant if it says oversee the management, that meant that the management responsibilities rest elsewhere, and that's with the superintendent. So if the board has as a governance tool policy, the superintendent has as a management tool, regulations and procedures, which come in many forms: employee handbook, student handbook, sometimes just directives. And the idea is that policy establish what? Policy should be clear, concise, and direct. I heard one of the public speakers mention that, clear, concise, and direct. And it establishes what is supposed to happen in the district. And then within those boundaries, the superintendent's responsibility is to put in place the action plans so that that policy is put into motion, is implemented. So 1995, that's why that's important. And that's somewhat how our framework in looking at policies was developed. In your policy manual, you have two types of policies: legal policies, and those are not adopted by the board because they essentially reflect the law. So legal policies will come from the legislature, from Congress. Legal policies also will come from state agencies in the form of Texas Administrative Code rules, or even federal rules that will impact school districts. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the old school law bulletin. Well, I think they still publish it. The school law bulletin, that big book where unless you know exactly what chapter the topic that you're looking for is in, it's not really user-friendly. So what the legal policies in your policy manual does is categorizes those parts of the law based on the subject that they relate to. If you wanted to know about teacher contracts, term contracts, Chapter 21. Those particular provisions will be in DCB, legal, of your policy manual. If you wanted to know about graduation requirements, you can go to EIF and see the state graduation requirements. So legal policies merely restate law. Board policy, the local policy, is what you adopt. That's where recommendations will be made. And if you look back in the statute, and again, on those Fridays where you have nothing else to do, if you're reading BAA, take a look at BJA legal, where you will see the superintendent's responsibilities. And what you will notice is that the superintendent has a policy role too. Superintendent not only, according to statute, recommends policy, but also has to put in place those regulations to implement it. So I mention that because a lot of times the policy changes you see will come from the administration in line with the responsibility laid out in statute. And that's why we spend the bulk of our time with the administrators, listening to them talk about the practices, and then gathering that information to prepare the recommendations that will ultimately be brought to the board for your consideration. But local policy, that's where the board essentially establishes the local laws for the district that will be in place. Now, as we evaluate what should go into a local policy, there are several things that come into play. First, sometimes the law requires that a local policy exists. And one of the best examples is EHBAF, which deals with audio, video monitoring in special education classrooms. Also, one that relates directly to you, and we will talk about, BBB local. A lot of times this could just be taken care of just as a document, just to outline when terms start, when terms end, but there's a legal requirement that the board have this laid out in local policy. So that's why you have the BB local. So that's one reason the law states that you need a local policy. Some other reasons, risk mitigation, DIA local, FFH local, which deals with freedom from discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. Those are in place to lay out the board's expectation that you create an environment where that type of behavior is prohibited, and then what someone would do if they experience it or if they've seen someone else experience it. And then once that is done, once a report is made, what should the administrative staff do? And if someone is unhappy with the final result, the parent, the student, the employee, what is the appeal process? So risk mitigation is another reason. Legal options, sometimes the law gives you options, and the idea with policy is you want to ensure that decisions in the district are fair and consistent and not arbitrary and capricious. So you may get several options. The board has to decide which one will be in practice in Leander ISD, and that decision is usually made in board policy. Talked about governance. Governance means delegating authority. That's one governance activity. That is usually done through board policy. Purchasing authority, hiring authority are perfect examples of that. And then the reason that we're here this evening is we talk about procedures. Usually when I use the term procedures, I'm talking about those items that are not board adopted, regulations, procedures. This is the one instance where it would be board adopted because it deals with the board. Superintendent can't make procedures that deal with board meetings. That will happen with the board's approval. So we'll be talking about those Section B policies that deals with board operations. And then there's a wild card. So most of the time, we're using those reasons that I just gave you. Every community is different, and there are some things that we might recommend not including in a local policy, but after having conversations with the district and talking through what is happening and what their desire is, we may put something in local policy that might have been more appropriate in a regulation or a procedure. And that would fall under the community considerations reason, okay? So that's kind of how we operate when we are trying to determine what should go into a local policy, or what provisions should come out of a local policy. So tonight, as I see many of you have your packets, there's no adoption action tonight. I wanted to make sure that was clear. The idea is just to listen to you. I have made some recommendations based on that framework that I just laid out for you. And there are things in here that you might decide, hey, we need to keep that. And there are things that you may be okay with recommending or moving forward with taking out of the policy. So again, the conversations today, as Sean mentioned, is just to inform me so that I can put together the appropriate recommendations for you. Any questions before we dive into the policies you have before you?
To clarify, tonight we'll go, you've prepared a packet, those are items you identified, and then the board members can talk about items they identified. That'll be after we get through the packet. So that may or may not be in the packet. Obviously, if we talked about the packet, then we're good.
Correct, and I forgot to mention that there's some in the packet, and then there's some that I will pull up on your policy online as well. At any time, if you have a question, please stop me and chime in with your question. I'll try to remember to pull up the drafts that are in your packet, as well as, I'm gonna close the PowerPoint because I don't need it anymore. And as well as going to the policies online.
So to help kind of the flow of conversation, we're going to go ahead and have Holly come up too and sit up here with Sean. So that way, just in case, helps the conversation go. Thank you.
I have a quick question. So if there are some policies that are sort of reviewed but determined that there's no change to be made, is it standard at some point where some boards may go through some policies and go, okay, this one hasn't been updated for 10 years or 20 years, but we're just going to put a check mark here at the bottom that says last reviewed 2022, and that way you know that even though no changes were made, but it was actually touched.
There are some districts that have selected to put language at the bottom of the policy to reflect that. The bottom notes, and I'm just going to pull up an example just to explain a little bit. Let's see. I'll pull up your BBB local. Yeah, hopefully it comes up. There it is. So you see at the bottom, that information just indicates when we processed it, and then the district would need to include in that adopted space when it was actually acted on by the board. So I'm going to use this as an example. Most of the time, for a local district update, and that's what LDU stands for, the date issued is after the board has taken action on it. And that's usually how it works. So the adopted date is probably going to be sometime maybe in April, it could have been in March, it just depends on when we find out about it. So some districts have included text at the end of each of their policies to indicate maybe last reviewed and no changes made. A district can do that. Now what will happen, and I didn't go into a whole lot of detail about that, is there are two types of policies. There's a base version. So when I mentioned EHBAF, the policy that deals with audio and video monitoring in special education classrooms, the law says you need to have a policy. And sometimes it's helpful in giving us a framework for the policy, so we'll use that to develop it. When we do that, we issue that to the districts in the state, and it is essentially what we call a base version of the policy. And you can identify what that is at the bottom. This is not, and I'm going to tell you why in a second, by looking at the policy code, local, and it'll usually say an A, A1, B, or something. Anytime a district makes a change to a base version policy, no matter how small, it becomes a unique policy and requires a little bit more hands-on work from the policy consultant, and sometimes have to pull in legal to review. So a district could add those to all of their policies, which will essentially create unique policies for them in the manual. And if that's not an issue, that's okay. But if the board has set up some way to review policies on a regular basis, and if that is indicated or included in the policy, it would change each time. But that's kind of what this is for as well, to kind of walk through those every 5 to 7 years. But some districts do. I'll mention that. So it's something the district could do if they wanted to. Mm-hmm. All right? Okay. So, 1 second, I'm trying to operate all of this at once. Okay, so beginning with AE. And usually this policy is the foundation, because policy changes should be made based on what the district is trying to achieve. So in many districts, they include their vision statement and their mission statement alone. And I pulled this off the website, so I'm assuming that is still up to date. Regarding the philosophy, you can see when this policy was last touched, 13 years ago. So I didn't know if that was still, because I can't remember if it was on, if this is part of the guiding documents that you have online, the ethical behavior, which has probably been board approved. And one of the things, if the district wants to keep this, you can. If it's still accurate, we could retain this. The only thing, I guess, the vision here would probably still need to come out. But if everything is still accurate, from the graduate profile, the strategic objectives and everything, if the board wishes to retain it, you can. The other option, since you, and when I looked at your website, all the guiding documents were there. One of the other recommendations is to link to them on your website. So when they're updated there, mission and vision, sometimes they're pretty stable for a fairly long period of time. I know districts that have goals that sometimes change yearly. You could link to them or you could put them in here, but you can see, at least with the vision and mission, it had not been updated since 2008. So if the district wants to keep this in, we can, and make the adjustments to the vision and mission. I just need just sort of general, it's not a vote, it just, if I see enough heads nod, and you will get these back. If this comes back and this is stricken and you want to keep it, at that time, you can make the decision to keep it. But should I keep it or should I take that out?
Eric, I will say what I like. I'd like to hear other board members though, right? Because that's where it happens, through deliberation, discussion, and we'll just keep working through it. I like the idea of having our vision and mission. The core beliefs of the board. I would love to see our core beliefs and then a link to all of our other guiding documents. We have the strategic plan online, we have our graduate profile, we have the 10 ethical principles, we have the Leander Way. Those are items that we are asking our staff, our life-changing educators to refer to as they pull up curriculum. So it seems like that is kind of our educational philosophy that we spend a lot of time on. But again, that's my first thought. I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts as well.
I'm with Trish. I would love to see our core beliefs in there, because our core beliefs is what drove us to find our mission, vision, strategic plan, graduate profile. I actually went and compared our local peer districts, same peer districts that Elaine gives to us in our Focus on Finance reports. And a lot of their AE local policies do have their core beliefs, but then also a little bit snippets of what the board's role is, superintendent's role. What I loved about one in particular talks about student outcome goals, again, graduate profile, a strategic plan. I feel like that there's ways for us to incorporate our documents that we've been working on into this policy.
So regarding linking to the website, because the document has a date at the bottom and then the website can be updated, so it seems like the only thing in the document that is specific to the date that it was adopted is really just the link, but the contents are changing. And so I don't know if there's an issue with that where the underlying content is changing, so it's more up to date than what is in the document, which is just a link.
Can I ask a question, Sade? Are you talking about our vision and mission changing?
No, where he was talking about the other things, which is like, I guess those are not changing, right? The, the graduate profile, the 10 ethical principles, even though I think in that document it was actually different.
I thought it was slightly different.
I'm sorry?
I thought it was slightly different. That may have been.
Yeah, so some of those might change over time. And so if you have a link, the website will have content that's different. So like, let's say this was all hyperlinked to the website. Mm-hmm. So the date on this is, it's the only thing in this document that is from that date, from 2013 or whenever it was, would be the link, but the content is actually different.
In the link document or in the policy?
In the policy. The policy would just be the link too.
Well, yes. With the sort of anchored with the vision and mission, if those are still, yeah, and core beliefs at that note.
Okay.
Or whatever else the board would want to include.
Right, because it's my understanding the strategic plan and the guiding documents we worked on as a board and passed supposed to last for 5 years, my understanding, correct? So I don't know if it'll be changing anytime soon.
I like having the core beliefs in there because it drove what was the mission and the vision, you know, those other pieces. But I do like the link to, I think the Leander model. I'm surprised the Leander model is not in there already because it's so fundamental to LISD and has been for a long, long time. So I think it'd be great if we had links for those so that you don't have pages of, you know, the graduate profile and the learning model, things like that. But I do think, you know, those core beliefs are fundamental to that document.
I think adding the Leander way and even the student learning behaviors and all of the things that are listed on that front page of our guiding documents, I think it should all be linked. We're not, you know, I understand there was some concern from the community that we were taking a bunch of stuff out when in fact we're truly updating it to match what's already on the website, right? What our policies and our guiding documents truly are. And so I think adding all of those things is essential. We're not getting rid of anything, we're just making it new, updating.
Sean and Holly, can you give us any clarification, or Eric, if we want to link things off of the policy document, does that cause a problem? Is that unusual or does that work?
In my experience, it's not terribly common to have a lot of links in the local policy, but I don't foresee a problem with that unless if there are documents that need to be approved by the board, then they will need to come before the board separately and be approved and the website updated. So, I mean, I think that's very feasible.
And we've gotten better with links over the years too.
Is there a need to have on the website, say on that page where it says guiding documents website, to actually indicate that this maps to some policy document, and then that way if people are changing the website, they know not to break that document and vice versa?
That's a good idea.
I was going to suggest the same thing. I think cross-linking helps to reinforce the connection. I was also going to suggest that so long as we have the full body of the materials in the policy section and on the website, then we don't really have any concerns about, you know, is one out of sync with the other and that sort of thing. So I think as long as we pursue that path, we're good.
So just to confirm, core beliefs, vision and mission is okay, and then a link, and it'll be somewhat of a descriptive link to the guiding documents that are currently on your website.
Yes. Or do we list each of them, like you can find the current guiding documents has like the district goals is under their vision, mission, district goals. And then the guiding documents has strategic plan, core beliefs. Do we need to list those out in the policy and then just link to it?
Let me do this. I can give you some options.
Okay.
to select from. So I can do one where it's somewhat a simple link, and then one where it might list out the other documents if you want. Just keeping in mind, as things, if you just have a simple link, as things change on your guiding documents page, you don't have to come back to your policy to remove if something came off. Any other questions on AE? Okay. Okay. BBB, and I wasn't quite sure how to proceed on this one, so that's why we have this conversation. That's why we have these conversations. So the one thing I know is that there's 7 members, because I counted them, and you all are at large by place. November elections, 4-year terms. So let's start with places 1, 2, 6, and 7. It says 2022. Which places are up for election this year, or would be up if there is no, if someone's running unopposed? But what places come up this year?
And Eric, also, I think the way you're asking that question is we have a board member who resigned, and so we had another board member who filled the position. So when you're talking about what places are up, there will be additional. We'll have an additional
to fill
place.
an unexpired term.
Yes,
so if everything,
that's different.
if everything was okay, and yes,
1, 2, 6, 7.
So 1, 2, 6, 7. So it's 20. It should be 2022, 2026, and it should be 2030.
2030. Yeah, 2030.
It should be 2030. Okay, now, and then the next one, and I think that's where I was kind of confused, and the next one would be
2032.
Perfect. And that's what I was asking about. Was it place 5 where that was? Okay. Okay, so we'll fix that draft. And it's by plurality, right? So there are no runoffs?
Right.
Okay.
Before we get too deep, I just want to ask if there's any appetite to consider annual elections in November with 3-year terms to avoid having 4 board members up for election at one time.
And your answer is fine, whatever, but that's one of the things we've talked about before, so this is our time to talk about it. I'm seeing head shake. Nope. Okay. Okay.
So I'll fix that draft for you. We'll get those fixed. And then here's BJA local. Here's BJA local. And the only thing I wanted to really mention, it lays out the superintendent's responsibilities and duties. A lot of times this aligns with the evaluation instrument used to evaluate the superintendent. But one thing that I noticed in reviewing your policies, there are a number of times where we will see superintendent or designee. So over the years, we begin the process of trying to curtail the use of that in the standard policies that we provide, partly because in your local policy, there's already this delegation statement. So the superintendent can delegate responsibilities, but they're still ultimately responsible for their completion if that's what the policy says. There's some instances where the board has delegated authority and it can't be further delegated. And you'll find that in DC, for example, hiring authority. So essentially that's what this statement is saying. To the extent permitted by law, I think there's some purchasing provisions as well where the superintendent can't further delegate. Anytime you see the superintendent, it's delegable. That's a tongue twister. It's delegable. Okay, so we try to remove or designee, and we're catching up as we review those policies. So going back to the standard policy, a lot of the unique policies that you had was because you added or designee. Okay.
So you removed the or designee from
And
this?
well, not in this policy. I just wanted to point to you sort of the reason why that this will serve as rationale when you see the removal of or designee and the
All right.
policies that you see in the future.
So Eric, on BJA, I'm going to go back to the vault here. And Aaron, I think, yeah, it might have been only Aaron and I. Gloria, Alexis, were y'all here when we did the curriculum deficit audit discussion? Okay. So as far as in the CMA, the BJA local was one that the policy committee at that time, the board policy committee was working on, but we never really got something out to the board. So I would like because our curriculum managed audit had identified this, to just have our policy subcommittee make sure this is accurate with the practice. I will also point out, and I don't know if this is something, again, I'd like our policy subcommittee to look at it, but if I recall correctly, I've written it, I know I recall because I looked it up. If I'm reading correctly what I wrote down, our curriculum management audit says they really talked about our programs, that we need to have some type of evaluation system before we adopt programs and after. And on that evaluation, and we need to ask the superintendent to develop and implement a district performance evaluation process and then report to the board the program effectiveness. And then the other one was, and I guess it was in here that we lost points on, again, this would be up for the policy subcommittee to look again, was to require our budget to be aligned. And at that time it was aligned to, I think it was board priorities or whatever. I guess it would be at this time, it would be to our strategic plan that we're looking at. Again, I'm not sure, as we start working through some of this stuff, other policies may be addressing, but I just thought sending it to the policy subcommittee to kind of look at is not a bad idea.
I feel like we had a conversation about that at the beginning. Yeah, I agree. I want that too. I know, sorry.
And as much as possible, if we've captured the work that we did previously around this section, those notes would be a great place to start. I don't
have your notes, Aaron.
I might be able to find them.
I'll go look. I'll go check my archive too. Yeah.
I'm hoping staff may have those as well. I mean, many of the staff we worked with in that process are still in the district. A couple are not. But I think we can find those materials, and I think that would be a good jumping off place.
I believe, yes. So this is the first example, BBD local, where the district, and this is regarding the training, the Public Information Act training, and there's the TOMA, the Texas Open Meeting Acts training, and the PIA. Board members have to take the TOMA training. The PIA training can be delegated to someone in the district to complete that training on behalf of the board. A lot of times the school boards aren't dealing with fulfilling public information requests. So, but here's the example where the or designee would be able to be removed, and that's the only recommendation I'm making there. Okay. Any questions on that one? Okay. Let's go to, you should have BBE, and I don't think there were any revisions on the policy, but I put it in your packet because as I was reviewing your operation procedures regarding information, and this policy is regarding board member access to information, and you probably already know, as a board member, you have access to information that I, as a member of the public, might not have access to as you fulfill the responsibilities of a board member. So when you're in your official capacity, you have access to sometimes fiscal information, business transactions, et cetera, and you'll see that that is mentioned here under individual access. And then there's some times where you have access to confidential student information as well when you're hearing a grievance regarding a student. So this policy is about board authority and, in addition, board access to information. So when it gets to requests for records, according to your operations plan, and I should have put the page number down.
This could be section 11, I think.
Say again?
11, I believe.
It's on page 11? Page 12, okay. Yes, right there. Number 11. So I just want to confirm, and this is one where we're just trying to align the two. So according to your policy, it states that information requests, requests for records or requests for copies of records would be made to the superintendent or other designated custodian of records. According to your board operations procedures, and let me see, I thought this was, let's see. It would only be to the superintendent and not to someone else. So if you have a request for information, there's not another designated custodian of records you would send that to. It would go straight to the superintendent based on your operating procedures. Is that the practice? Okay. So if that is the practice, my recommendation would be to remove "or other designated custodian of records," since that's the desire and expectation. And y'all see where that is? Right here. And that second, that last sentence would also come out because it would never be going to, it shouldn't be going to a custodian of records. It should be going to the superintendent. Any questions about that? Sort of just aligning the two. Okay. And the rest of the policy and the board ops seem to align, especially the part about referring complaints and how those are I call that the HEB provision.
Charles Butt would be proud.
Not meaning to advertise, no endorsement intended. And then you'll see this very last piece, visits to district facilities. That did not exist several years ago, but there was legislation passed that required every school district to have a policy about board members' visits to district facilities. And essentially what we're doing is we're referring back to GKC, which have provisions about visitors to campuses. So that's more of an FYI for you. Okay. Moving on to BBF, and you have 2 copies, and I wanted to show you our standard policy language for this, which has been around for a very long time, and I was not around when it was created, but they worked really hard to create the acrostic that you see in this policy. Yes, and looking at your current policy, it's not quite acrostic, but the principles are still important. So I just wanted to talk about them a little bit, just to make sure they are still current, because they were not, what was that? They were last touched or last revised back in 2000. So just wanted to make sure you have the student-centered focus. And we might be able to, looking at some of these, it might be time to update our standard policy here. Student-centered focus, commitment to service, those are kind of unique to the district. That's what creates a unique policy for the district. About the board member becoming more informed about current educational issues and supporting and protecting school personnel and the proper performance of their duties. Was there anything that you saw in there that was not current, or anything that you saw in ours? And I think you had most of ours. It may have been slightly reworded that you might want to migrate over. Forget about the acrostic. And it's the principles that are more important. Anything that you see that you might want to move over from the standard, just trying to get your feedback on how this policy, or is it okay as is?
I'm open to discussions, but there was something that really jumped out at me that I want to point out, which is that the version y'all had given us had student-centered focus the very last, and I like student-centered focus at the very top. I know it messes it up.
I know.
Because it's not ethic anymore. It's ethics, but I just like student-centered focus.
No, that makes sense, yes. Any other thoughts on this one? And you'll have more time to think about it, but what I will do is I'll include both just for you to review, and if there's something that you want to move over to yours, and maybe yours is fine, you'll have that to look at and just to let me know once the board takes action. Okay?
And Eric, I know we're moving on to the other sections, but when I look at BDB local and BDF local and BE local, and I'll tell you what those are. BDB local is the board internal organization internal committees. BDF local is the board internal organization citizen advisory committees. And BE local are board meetings. And I looked online to make sure, because you know my copy's old and I've been holding on to this for a while. Still, some of the language we have on there isn't updated to how we do our current practice.
Okay.
And so I'd like to get all that kind of in line with our board operating, or make sure we're just kind of clear all the way through.
Okay. And we can talk about that when we get to it. Let's see.
I have a question, Trish.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. So in regards to those, when the Board Operating Procedure Committee meets, then we bring our findings back to the board and then go from there as far as policy?
That is because we talked about having, so we can also bring that. The board has those discussions. Then, of course, since this is going at the same time, they can take those discussions and use that to propel their next steps.
Okay, I was just asking. Thanks.
So for the BDB, and I may have, let me make sure. I thought I had. Yeah, I didn't have any questions about BE. So when we get to those, if you wanted to talk about them, we can. If you're going to go through that process and get those to me, we could do that as well. Okay. So BBG, regarding expense reimbursements, and this was based on a review of the board operating procedures. And this was, I think it's page 15, and it talked about per diems that I see often in districts' policies for employees and sometimes for board members as well. So I was just aligning the board operating procedures and the policy. Is that your practice? Okay, and the reason, if you look at your policy, the reason I removed them, because advancements and per diems operate a little differently. So I just wanted to make sure that those were cleaned up.
Eric Kalain had worked on some of our travel language. At one time, it wasn't aligned, where there were some things with the hotel guidelines, and we needed to match comptrollers' roles. So Helene came in with that. This isn't supposed to be that you'd only do per diem. I think there's these different options. I guess I'd just like to make sure we check with Helene to make sure all this language is updated properly with what the requirements are, and that we're meeting everything, at least Audit expects us to be meeting, and that we know we're meeting what Audit is. Okay.
I have a comment regarding the exception for BBG. So it states on the second line, it talks about what shall be paid to employees on a per diem basis, and I was wondering if it was basically as in the board operating procedures, it talks about the same rates that is paid to employees, because this is regarding board members.
And that should be board member. Yeah.
And my recollection is that our process is that you can either claim per diem or actual expenses. And so we might change this language to may rather than shall.
May is in our board operating procedures, so.
Okay. Any other questions about that particular policy? All right. So BDAA, and just want to have the conversation to make sure I'm understanding. The changes that you see, again, just based on the questionnaire that I ask individuals to answer based on the practice. And this was the response. So the changes you see are based on that particular response. So here's my question. If there is a vacancy in the office of board president, and we're talking new job, may have to move out and can't finish the term, does the board reorganize or does the vice president automatically become president?
Trish, we actually have this in our board operating procedures.
Yeah.
We do. It says, in the event of a vacancy in an officer's position, the board may, by a majority action of the board at any duly called meeting, fill the vacancy.
Okay. So your current policy is okay. My second question is, what is the term of a board officer?
1 year.
It's only 1 year?
Isn't that right? Board ops, 1 year. Yeah.
Yes, you're right. It's in our board officers shall serve for a term of 1 year or until the next called officer election. That's in our board operating procedures, by the way.
Okay. I did want to, oh, here it is. I have it now. So in the board operating procedures, it also states the new board will meet at the next regularly scheduled meeting after the results are canvassed to review the selection of the following board officers.
Yeah, that's
so that happens. So you every year, is it, when do you reorganize on an off year?
That's I think Holly, you can get with her, and Sean, but we are unique in that November we do it statutory required. The plan is, though, that we'll actually have those discussions and do reorg after our graduations in June.
Okay. So it is truly 1 year.
So it goes from June to June, but it's required that after an election,
right.
You
have to do it at the first meeting after the election.
Exactly.
Okay. So it is 1 year. Okay. So
it's 1 year, but with no term limits.
And that there are no term limits in the policy.
So that board president can be reelected.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. I just worked with a district where they did have term limits for their board officers. There are none in the policy currently, so could be reelected into perpetuity. Okay, so it looks like this policy is okay.
I had just a comment for myself for us to either talk about later, or we kind of updated some other language that made it the secretary's responsibility to submit a superintendent evaluation if we didn't have consensus. So I didn't know if we needed to kick that out to committee for further discussions, or how we.
Yeah, it's in our board operating, so I think that's something we can also look at, Trish, when we meet.
And then, because the board operating committee had planned to meet, we'll bring that back for board discussion. And then what we'd like is for y'all to kind of align, and then you can take it to subcommittee and see if there's anything else.
Okay. So yeah, it doesn't look like there would be anything for me to recommend. So if there's anything that you all need, you can.
And Holly, you'll help us connect, or Sean connect those dots. Okay. Next.
Actually, I have a question. I'm trying to understand what was said about the automatically become president. Yes, because it's different in the board operating procedures.
Right,
okay,
right.
Wanted to clarify that.
Again, I use the questionnaire as my guide.
All right.
When I make these policies. And that's why I still have the conversations, because sometimes the practice is different. So yeah, there would be no changes in this particular policy that I would be recommending. Okay. The next policy is BF, and again, based on the questionnaire, how many, before a policy is approved, how many readings does it take? Is it a single reading or is it 2 readings? Okay. Okay. So your current policy reflects a single reading process. So say again.
Sometimes it's a single meeting where there's a reading and then we vote.
Yeah, if it's standard, like
But
policy language
standard is,
updates,
yeah,
then it
standard is the 2. For policy, right?
Eric, could you talk to us about how common a second reading is and how many districts do that or don't do that?
Yes, most districts that I've worked with have a single reading process. It's rare that I see 2 readings, and after I talk to them about it, a lot of them kind of model it off the legislature, which is actually 3 reading process. But with the single reading process, you still have that flexibility. If there's more information that's needed, there can be a motion to defer that. So right now, you have that flexibility with the current policy.
I like flexibility.
Okay.
And then our curriculum management audit, I believe that was something we scored higher on because of having the single reading option. But as the board has stated, depending upon our policy subcommittee, community input, sometimes we may say, oh, we want another reading. So we still have that flexibility to ask.
But it's the use of the word shall. That's what's compelling us to make it discuss at one meeting and vote at the next meeting.
With this process,
Yes.
Yes. In your current process, you can do that. But I think I understand your question. It's mandated unless there's an emergency adoption, and that's fairly flexible. What is an emergency adoption? Oops, we forgot to put the item about the band uniforms on the agenda. So for this purpose, we're going to do a single reading because we can't wait till the next meeting to do it. Now, that's not an emergency item based on the law, but that's an example of something that might be emergency adoption.
We talked about this, and I think about this in terms of just board meeting efficiency. I think that there's times when, like, we're all in agreement, or we have our discussion, I should say, and we're ready to vote, and bringing it back 2 weeks later, all the staff that presented have to come back again, just so they can go up there and say, hey, remember, I did this 2 weeks ago. Do y'all have any questions? And we're like, no, we're cool. And we call a vote. And so in times like that, I do think it would have been, I like the flexibility but I like being able to not have that required, and being able to take action just so that all of our board meetings don't have to, end the next day.
This is not a hill I want to die on. I will say we are talking about policy adoption. Your example of band uniforms is not a policy item. Generally, I don't encounter, in my experience, I haven't encountered very many emergency policy adoption discussions. And so, you know, generally taking a couple of weeks to read it once and then put it on consent even at the second meeting. So assuming nothing comes up, it's done and dusted. Doesn't bother me. So, you know, 2 readings is not anything I'm too worked up about. And I think is generally a good process to show a measured adoption process. But again, not a hill I want to die on.
I agree with both, if that's possible. I remember this being my first board meeting, but that line, that little bit, wasn't that in there because of COVID? I remember there was something we had to pass and we put that little piece in there. Anyway, I like what y'all both said. It's either one.
I'm with you. I think my brain was thinking in general, because I was thinking of your example, no offense. But if I go back to policy, it's like, we could move it to consent. And that way, you know, if we wanted to, yeah.
So just a piece of feedback just to help you kind of think about this. The struck out language on there is what you currently have. I mean, you already have the ability to do this in one meeting if you wanted to. And it may, I mean, I can't anticipate every hypothetical. There may be some instance where we need to take some immediate action. And so maybe having that flexibility is a good thing. Generally, as a practice, not related to your board operating procedures or your policy, we've done it as a 2-read process just to ensure that we are fully vetting these. So I don't think that by keeping your current language that it will change how we practice per se. If you make this change, it could change that because it takes away that flexibility unless you can declare that emergency. So that's just some food for thought as you determine whether you would like that 2-read language to be in there for sure, or if you would like to maintain the language that you currently have.
And Sean, again, I'm up to board will on this. I have no specific leaning, other than I would like somebody to go back and check that curriculum management audit. And I thought they liked, I know, if you tell me the document, I'm keeping it in my memory, but they liked, for some reason, that. I'm just curious, why did they like it? I thought they gave us points because of that, and I'm not sure why they would. Maybe I misunderstood it, so if we can just double check.
We can definitely double check that, and if that's the case, then that would be more evidence that it would be wise to maintain your current language that you have in this policy.
And we don't have to do it. Again, I just want to know, what was somebody thinking that I wasn't?
But I think we're seeing consensus that we want to keep existing language, right? Okay.
No, we have BJCG and BQA.
I'm not used to this, sorry. BJCG, if you look at the provisions and you look at the title of the policy, they don't relate. The policy is about resignation. The language is about non-renewing the superintendent's contract. So the information, the information about non-renewal is addressed in a different policy, BJCF. And let me just pull it up just to show you. I'm not sure what happened and why that language, that's the legal, and here's the local. Which talks about the reason. So my recommendation is to delete this particular policy, BJCG.
Is it possible that there was a clerical error? It looks like it's exactly the same language. Was there supposed to be some other language on this page?
Not to my knowledge. I'll double check, but the last time it was touched, which was it? I'm sorry, I was going to pull it up.
Yeah, it's less about when it was last touched.
It was about 2000, yeah, I don't
think
know.
my point is that it looks like someone may have made a clerical error, either duplicating the other policy in this page, or there may have been other language around superintendent resignation that was intended to be populated on this page and wasn't.
I can look, I can't remember if we have a base version here at this code or not. I can check, and I could provide that language for y'all regarding resignations if there is some.
I know that y'all printed out this book for me when I first got on the board in 2015, and that was a question I had. So the language is duplicated like that since 2015. And it could have been longer. I just know when I got here.
I agree. I think we should delete that then.
I'll review, I'll double check and see. I wouldn't have access to any records if something was sent in 20 years ago, given our retention schedule. But I'll double check. I can't recall if we have base version language that would go here that may have gotten replaced. But if we did, it probably would have been issued as base language text. But I'll double check. Okay.
I mean, just in general, do we think that we need a policy around, I mean, it helps to see a base version. I just did a quick search. I do see a few other districts and their own version. So it might be helpful for us to really look into this and see if it's something, because if the superintendent resigns, then what happens? It would be nice to have something to fall back on.
Okay.
I'm telling him he's not resigning, just so he knows.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Not looking at it. BQA, I did notice you did mention our curriculum audit, so.
Yes.
Thank you for looking at that.
Yes, yes. So, and the text change is minor. Anytime there's a reference, and I just wanted to make you aware of that too, anytime there's a reference to Leander or LISD, the district is intended to represent that. So this is a unique policy by nature, so there's not standard policy, but I just that's part of the policy style to keep the manual consistent. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. I spoke in detail with the administrators regarding this policy and the practices, so you'll see the results of that conversation when you receive the packet. Okay?
And I may have more questions. I'd like to kind of review how it works with legal and all that good stuff. So thank you.
Okay. Now, those were all if there's any other questions about section B before we move on to any, or any other policy, I'm more than happy to talk about those. And I'm going to close the handout, and I'm going to go to the policy online.
Like all policy? You want questions?
If it's okay, let's go through it by letter section so we can do our B section, and we'll see what questions there are about B section that remain. Board members, anything in the B section?
So we're all clear. The communication we got from Sean directed us to consider A and B sections for tonight. So I haven't prepared to discuss every policy section in policy tonight. So I think an exercise that goes beyond A and B for me is not going to be very productive tonight.
So I may have read it at a glance, but I spent a lot of hours last night going through some of the areas. But I also agree. I don't think going in deep discussion is going to be beneficial, but I'd like to raise up a few of those areas as we move through those letters.
Yeah, don't misunderstand. If you have stuff you want to raise, that's fine. If other board members do as well. From my perspective, though, that's just creating a punch list for future discussions, and it needs to be an open list because I think myself and others aren't ready to add to that list tonight.
I read it as if we got through A and B sections, then maybe we would discuss it. But I'm willing to throw it at y'all if y'all want it, because some of these policies are from 2000, 2001, 2003, and they affect our students, like FL local, FN local, GE local. I could go on.
Let's start with B. Does anybody have anything pressing in their mind that is in A or B that was pressing? Okay. For B, I have a question on BP local. And it says, administrative regulations are subject to board review, but shall not be adopted by the board. I think there's something really healthy in that statement, right? Because you have administrative regulations that are under the purview of the superintendent and the district, and the board is more of that direction, vision in their policy. But I do notice that some districts, when I went and looked at other districts, their administrative regulations were online. So in other words, you had your board policy that was legal, you had local, if you had exhibits, you put exhibits in there, if you had regs, you put regs in there. And I think that gives your community a chance, and as a trustee, because what I'll do is, like I was looking at some districts, I'm like, what does this policy look like? I could go look at their exhibit, I could go look at their regs, I'm like, oh, this is how the district does it. Do we have regs, and is there a reason we haven't put them online, or is that where we're going to? And so when I was looking at this, that's what triggered for me in thinking, is that kind of our next steps as a district?
So we do not have TASB's regulation manual, and that may be what you're seeing online, because they do have that opportunity where you can what do you say, contract with TASB to help you with your regulations manual the same way they do with the board policy manual, but it's a completely separate document.
I wouldn't go that far. We have a model regulations resource manual that districts could use to craft their own regulations. And it's a starting point. And it's a model because some districts might have unique text that might need to be reflected accurately in the model. What you may have seen online are districts that have made the decision to put their regs and policies online. I usually recommend against that because it is policy online, board adopted, or statutorily driven, Congress, Texas legislature, agencies. So there's that legal component. Regulations, as you just read in BP, are not board adopted. So to maintain that clear distinction, I'm usually advising districts not to put them online. We don't update them like we do your local policies. But if a district decides to do that, we can. There are several districts who have made the decision to put those online.
I don't know if I have an appetite either way. I found it curious. I can see how it can be helpful, but to your point, I can also see how it can be negative as well. So definitely something I'll keep noodling.
Madam President, could I ask a question? Eric, is there an additional cost when districts do that?
It essentially, because it creates unique regulations, and there is an additional cost just to process it and place it online. I worked with the district not too long ago, and one of the recommendations I was making to them was to remove their regs from offline and to place them in an intranet where employees could have access to them. Their student handbook was already online. And when I kind of calculated it, it was about $6,500 addition. It doesn't seem like a lot in the scheme of things, but essentially that was the additional cost to their manual in having that additional text in there, when it could be maintained by the district on the website at no cost.
All right. Board members, any questions for C? I did notice that I think Elaine's brought a lot of this to us board members, so when I went, I had my old copy in the book, and I'd go look at it, it's like, oh yeah, we updated that, that's been updated. I'm curious about something, if we could go back and just ask on CH local, as far as purchasing authority. Elaine had mentioned once before, and I'm trying to decide if this is that section about when to bring items before the board and not. If we could just kind of circle back with her to see if CH local was what she was talking about.
And we did have a conversation about, I believe we had a conversation about CH. I'll have to check my notes. In the district's practice regarding that, I'll have to check my notes to see if there were any changes that resulted.
For CKE local, the school resource officers, notice we updated it in 2019, requiring for minimum training. But I know as a board we discussed some of the training those officers, and I remember, I don't know if we formally said it, but it was something to the effect of kind of being trained to be able to be in an educational population, and I don't know if that had a mental health or a student component. I wasn't sure. I remember I asked our security, and they gave us a fabulous answer for what training's out there. Can we circle back and check on that?
Would I be?
The training?
The type of training?
Yeah, is there a training type that our district admin would recommend for us to include in that policy?
I know when we had this discussion,
right,
they told us there was a different type of training that they were required to take that was very specific to working with like an adolescent community that was different than, you know, it was in addition to a police officer training. So I don't know, do you think that needs to be added in here?
I think what would be helpful to know is if that is, and if that's something we do, we should put that in our policy for our parents, for our community, and for us. When we're doing funding and budgeting, that's what we're paying for, that's what we're asking for.
Could I make a comment about that, Madam President? One example is training our school resource officers in whatever restraint de-escalation program the district uses, and that could change. There are a couple of very well-known programs that different districts use, but I've also seen districts change that from time to time. So if you had that specific in your policy, you'd need to change that. The other thing that we might want to look at is your MOU with school resource officers to see, I've looked at that before, but I don't recall whether we have training addressed in that, and we might have something in that already.
And again, whatever we would put in there would need to be something that in theory, it's policy, not regulation. Right. So whatever language that would be to reflect board vision, board policy, kind of higher up, that could last for 7 years or 5 years or however long before we need to do an update. For our CRD local, where we talk about our district's contribution to employee health insurance, we mention in there that it'll be part of the budget development and adoption process. From Holly and Sean's point of view, we actually, that is part of that, but we pull it with the compensation, the compensation and pay at that same time. Does that need to be in here, or is that too specific? District knows it, that wouldn't really be a place for it. And you know, I'm curious about y'all's recommendation, and then if it's up to board, then we can hear what board says.
I'm going to defer to Eric a little bit here because I know that this is one of the base policies of TASB. We've adopted the A version of this policy. I'm not sure if I'm quite following, because I don't think that this necessarily is something you would view in isolation, but this is pointing out that you will consider that in budgeting, which is perfectly sensible. I mean, most of that is a payroll cost that is the bulk of your budget.
85%. But it has just been a discussion of when that information comes before us. So we usually have that when we have the compensation or the package, you know, the payroll package that they bring to us, which I think they'll bring next month, and this is included with it. And that's different from the way we used to do that. It used to be in 2 different times. So I don't know if y'all think it's, whatever you think other policies are, if you think it's needed and it's helpful, if it's not and it's just extra language, I do not think we, again, clear and concise. CW local board members, I will just draw your attention to that, because like I see some head noddings. There's 2 things here, naming facilities. One, y'all talk about how we want to do naming facilities. So just pulling that back to your attention, if you think we should send this to the policy subcommittee, to our committee to look at and further review. There's another part of the naming of facilities where it talks about how they do the plaques on buildings as well. So it might be a time to kind of just have the policy committee look at it? I'm seeing a lot of head nods, yes?
Absolutely. I think, this is something we tried to do, and we kind of ran out of time last time, but I know that there was some discussion, and I know that I think we really need to have this discussion, and Alexis does as well, so.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, we try to put some parameters in place and took a dry run, but it would be good to go back and review and really get those honed in.
And Ms. President, the CW will be included in the packet. There was just one small change at the very end that I was recommending, where it talked about the letting of the contract. The language just seems.
On CW?
Yeah, so you'll see it in the packet.
All right. I'm just telling you, there may need to be more discussion.
Oh,
on
that's
CW.
that's perfectly fine.
All right.
Yeah.
That's great.
And to be clear, that discussion was really about updating, letting is old, ancient language, not really current.
Right.
It wasn't really a review. We weren't really reviewing it for what the process should look like. That's really for the board to decide. So if you want that to go to the committee, that's perfectly fine. We can take that there and start discussing the possibilities there.
All right. Board members, D is the section that I had not finished. I was going to look at it through the eyes different, so that's why it was my last section to review. I wanted to look at it with mandates, requirements from the state, how that's impacting our local, as we talk about with our employee workforce. There's so much, and so I just wanted to view that with my eyes to see what or if there's anything we could or should do in that policy. So I haven't finished D. Did anybody have, so I'll have to get those to y'all later. Did anybody have anything in D though? Somebody might have something. I'll move to E if not. Okay, section E.
Actually, with something I had looked at a while back regarding D just had to do with the DPB, and I was just curious to know, because it just hadn't been updated in, 6 years is not a very long time, but I just was curious whether this is still what is being used today. Oh, sorry, legal. I take that back. Never mind. Never mind. Never mind.
All right, E?
Yes.
I have a taker.
We do not have a local policy on this, so this is something I'd like our policy committee to look at and explore and bring it back to the board if possible, is schools of choice policy, EHBJ. I feel it's so important that, especially with our district considering these schools of choice, we already have early college. It's important that I think we get policy in place so that way these programs sustain what they need to do. Most importantly, there's guidance. We have a legal but no local.
I think that's an excellent recommendation.
And I can give you a list of all different ISDs that have that policy if you'd like.
Actually, that was my comment on the other one that I just mentioned about substitutes. So it was that we had a legal but not local. But just go ahead.
So that just, we don't have anything local. So, and then another E1 is EHBB. It's the GT policy. In 2021, legislators brought back the GT allotment. Our policy, I believe, was updated in 2018. I'd like to see this policy updated to 2022, but most importantly, a little more, I don't know what the right word is. I would just like to see it more robust, I guess. Again, policy committee, have fun with that.
Could I chime in? Because
yes.
EHBB will be included in Update 120.
Yay!
It's actually taking something out.
No.
It's no longer required.
I've been waiting for this update.
There will be an opportunity for you to take a look and to make additional revisions as well. I just wanted to make that.
Okay, y'all hear that?
Comment.
And then, all right, I'm done with E.
Okay. For EG, which it was EG back in the day, and it came out to EH, and this was all back from the curriculum management audit. I promise you I don't have to say that many more times tonight, but we had done, as a board, a lot of discussions on kind of the philosophy of curriculum. This was all based on the curriculum management assessment guides as well, where they're saying, we need to have vertical alignment of our written curriculum. Then how are you testing on that written curriculum? And then when you get further down, it talks about responsibilities. What do we want to see as far as you know, what should be reported to the board, what the board's going to review. And these are things, though, that when we did these discussions, we're like, well, how does this look, and is it going to work right? And I would like to see a deeper dive as we're doing our policy update on this, because we never brought it back to the board to really kind of do that. Like, is this a helpful policy? Did this get too administrative and we need to take something out? Or do we need more direction? And so I'd love to see some revisit on this language to see kind of how it works for our district. And point out, does that work? The philosophy, I'm curious on the philosophy part 2 on how now we put this with our education philosophy up top, or how do we reference, or does it need that? And I think that was it as far as questions, just trying to make sure it. Oh, and on some of these we do have board reports. And so for, like, it talks about parents. Each parent is encouraged to participate with their child, support learning. Well, it's in there when you get down to the bottom. And I just like to see, is there something, and I know we already do this in parts, but is there a way to tie back to our curriculum as far as when we're talking about parents? You know, we're encouraging parents to communicate regularly with teachers. Do they feel they have the tools available to them? Do they know how to, you know, which teachers to reach out to? I mean, elementary, it gets easy. Middle school, high school, which teacher, which class, or how to reach your librarian if you have questions, or your PE coach. Some of these things you know, but how do we loop back in the board to know how this is working as far as this parent engagement or parent involvement? And I think that's what I remember too, is the committee was like, well, it's parent involvement. Does responsibilities, is that the right word? Again, I just like the committee to kind of revisit that, given that we've had a few years with it now. Board members, any other thoughts on that? Okay. EHB local. Again, this was back from our curriculum management audit. And here's what our curriculum management audit said back in the day, 2017, I think it was, 2016. They said, we lost a lot of points on, and now you might be able to take the policy overall with legal and local and say this, we're not going to lose points anymore. But they said, we didn't look at equitable student access to curriculum, including resources and the learning environment. We didn't have anything in there for fast tracking for those who need more challenging content. And we didn't specify we were going to do annual review of equity data with a report out to the board and some type of parent involvement portion. And I'm just trying to quickly read my notes because it was getting later as I wrote these. But I'd love for our policy committee to possibly just go back and look at that.
I would too, because there's a section on here about dyslexia, and I'm curious to know if it's updated with the current law with dyslexia.
Our EHDD local, I don't know, maybe you've already looked at that. So I'm curious, that might be something I was thinking that's definitely going to come back to the board, so I may be jumping ahead, but we now have our virtual program, and so this is from quite some time ago. We don't talk about New Hope in there, and I would love to see this language kind of reflect more kind of the board direction of what we're going with. I thought I saw a district that either had an exhibit or a board reg that talked about it, but our district being able to provide dual credit with the help of maybe Lee for getting the books, that's a unique thing. I think our district, or not all districts can do it that way, and we are. So I was curious if that's somewhere too, if there's a place to put that. It wouldn't be though in policy, so. But you know, I think that one, I'm hoping you are going to revise that. So I was like, oh, I should leave it alone. But then I'm like, yeah, I'll ask about it because our board's done so much work on that.
And I don't think that one was included. Most of the revisions that you were suggesting would probably fall under that community considerations piece for including certain language in the policy, and that's information I would need to get from you in order to draft it appropriately.
EHDE also again refers to only the Texas School Virtual Network, and we do have another method of distance learning. And then EJ local, and that finishes up my E questions. I found EJ local interesting because I don't think we have it anymore. Yep, it's gone.
There's not an EJ legal either, I don't think.
And this is what I'm curious about. EJ local used to be an academic guidance program. We've now put all of our counseling under the health and wellness, which makes sense as far as mental health and wellness. But what I noticed is when I started looking for some of this language that was EJ local to see if it got put in with the health and wellness, it wasn't there anymore. But it talks about guidance and counseling services to help provide educational development of the students. And the services could include helping them improve academic achievement, school attendance, school attitudes. They do go into some of the, again, wellness things, such as developing self-confidence, healthy interpersonal relationships, life satisfaction. But it also says obtaining information to assist in choosing a potential career. And they go on to talk about kind of this, how, well, this is the language I liked too. Teachers shall use opportunities in classroom and extracurricular activities and in contacts with parents to achieve guidance objectives. Qualified counselors shall supervise the standardized testing program. See, that's why that one's gone, because I know we want to get our counselors to focus on that career and health and wellness. So I was just curious, that academic guidance portion, we still seem to have that in place though. Like we're doing one-on-one counseling in high school and we're telling our students, you know, we want them to have that plan in high school of where they're going, either career, college, military. But I don't see it in our local policy. I'm curious if you've seen it somewhere else or if I'm missing something.
It may be in the section that you were referring to, but if there wasn't a requirement that you have a local policy for it, it might have been more appropriate in a plan developed by the administration. That may be one of the reasons that it has gone away. I would have to go and do some research to determine how long ago it was taken out, because the whole code has disappeared or been moved to another section. So I can't recall from memory
the rationale. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. The only place I found it was Fort Bend ISD, but it hasn't been updated since 2016. And I looked at all of our peer ones and I couldn't find it.
For district vision to not have any of our academic guidance language in local makes me feel like we're missing something. It can be included. I don't necessarily say we need an EJ local because we don't have a legal, but it seems like we should have something in our policy. Board members, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I can send what I found, but I do like what it says, and I think it's a lot of what we're doing already with our documents. I mean, I don't see the harm in it. I think it has some good points to it.
All right, board members, item F.
Another policy I'm going to send to our fabulous policy committee is FO, local student discipline. It's in regards to a student's placement in, hold on, I'll get the correct word. Student's placement in a disciplinary alternative education setting. It was last updated 2014. There's some things I know we saw on our visit that don't reflect what's in there, and I'd like our policy committee to check that out. And then another one I was going to consider, and I thought maybe something either Bruce, you can weigh in on the board, was FC local rezoning, considering we have our long-term range facility planning, where that's headed, and the plans of it being a possibly 8 to 10 year plan. I think I'd like to see what that looks like to reflect our current practice right now.
Yeah, you had some of the ones I had marked, so thank you. You're saving me time. And I love that. I think that's the point, right? Board discussion to see kind of where the heads are nodding. For the FC local, when I went to go look at other districts, I didn't notice a whole lot had FC local. And so I'm just kind of curious if at some point, will you tell us, y'all are the standouts on this, can you do that and let us know? And that's fine, I don't mind being different if we have something that not others do. But if we're missing something that other districts do, it would be nice to know, and you might be able to quickly identify where I'm having to click on all the districts, all 1,000 whatever, so I don't think I'll be able to identify as quickly as TASB will.
Right, as I went through the process, if there were policies that are recommended for inclusion in your manual, I have touched on those either tonight or with the administrative team. There are a number of districts who do things in different ways, who may have policies in their manual that we may have tried to talk them into putting it in an appropriate place. It didn't fall into one of those reasons, but they decided to put it in their policy, and that's fine if that's the district's decision. I don't know, I would be able to tell you, I'm already gonna be able to tell you anything that might be missing that needs to be added, but there still may be things that other districts have made decisions on that wouldn't be part of that kind of final report. I did want to mention with FO to also keep in mind that your student code of conduct covers a number of your disciplinary policies, and there's a lot in there that is not in your policy manual. It has the force of policy though, because the board adopts the student code of conduct. But just to make sure that there's no misalignment or repeating of text. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of the things I was thinking about, and there's some pieces that really aren't aligned with like our diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. Also, like we talk a lot now in terms of student discipline, of restorative, discipline and restorative justice, and this student discipline doesn't address any of those restorative practices. And so I really think that needs to be looked at. There's some stuff in there that I was like, oh, that's interesting. It's like factors to include, factors that you should consider including is like, of course, the seriousness of the offense, yes, and then other things are like the student's overall attitude, and and so some of the stuff in here isn't aligned with some of the stuff that we're already practicing with our restorative circles and stuff like that. So,
and we do have a model student code of conduct that does take into account restorative discipline language that could be incorporated into the student code of conduct as well.
My last one is FN local students' rights. Again, what Gloria said, if you go back and look, this hasn't been updated since 2008. Just throwing it over to the policy committee. It's very general, but with a district that values the student voice and wanting to empower our students, again, you feel free to look at peer surrounding districts and their statement.
Board members, for F and G local, and y'all might have heard that one or two times, and F and G exhibit, and this is interesting because this is what we talked about. I had talked to Eric ahead of time about exhibits, like when do we choose exhibits and when do we not, and my philosophy is if we're going to err, I'd rather have an exhibit in there so parent sees it, but I also understand what Eric's saying. It's like, well, but is it helpful to the parent, or can we put it on another a site where our parent or guardian can access? I think those are all good questions, but as we've had grievances come before, sometimes we have questions. And I know Sean and Holly are aware of them. One of them I will point out as we look at all the grievance policy is, it says, please describe the outcome or remedy you seek for this complaint. And I would love to be able to add, like when they're doing a board grievance, we are going to be limited in the actions we can take. Now that doesn't, I mean, parents or whoever's filling out the grievance can still ask for whatever, but it's just, I would find it, and we've talked about it, helpful to let them know there are limitations. The board can do X, Y, Z, or whatever that is. And I'm not really sure the best way to do that, but I know we as a board have had that discussion several times before. Anything else? We're going to move out of F and into G. Anything in G? GBB local, we have the communication. Oh, did I do it? Oh, wait, never mind. I'm going to take it back. Anna, you go.
I think it's GE local is what you said, right?
I was doing GBB first.
Oh, sorry.
Was the communication?
I was going to talk about GE local because I'm trying to see, what was the policy that we talked about with the, what is it, GKD? Because GE local talks about PTA and PTO parent organization using facilities, but we have a new policy, or no, we don't. We're discussing GKD, and I'm curious how those two, if they interlap, do they cancel each other out? What?
That's great to look at that.
And that GKD will be included in your packet. We had a conversation about that.
Yeah, we had a board meeting on that, and so for me, when I was looking through that, that's why I'm wondering if the two cancel each other out, because GE local is all just for parent organizations as far as facility usage, and then you have the GKD where parent organizations are included in that language for that policy.
Maybe I'm not quite understanding.
Well, I don't think they cancel each other out. I mean, if you look at the current GE local, it talks about use of district facilities, and it says that will occur in accordance with policy GKD. So GKD is really going to govern how we deal with outside groups, meaning not the school, using the school facility. I don't think that this necessarily cancels anything. It provides a pointer so that a parent organization can look at this and say, oh, if I want to use a facility, then I need to go to GKD, and that's going to govern that usage.
So my last question in GBB, and I have other questions, to be fair. I have actually a lot of questions, but those are, I'm going to put in emails. These were the ones that were for like more discussions, and I think my other questions can be answered kind of offline. And I'm sure if they're breaking news, they will all get sent to y'all. But in GBB local, this takes me to kind of where my question's going to be. This one talks about communications and what we want our SCR to do. When I went and looked at other districts, I didn't see a whole lot of SCR in policy. So I understand that there's sometimes we might take a program or maybe a division and put it in policy, but I would like, I guess, for as we continue to move forward, to get some clarity on, there's a difference between, Eric, I think one of the things you're doing is making sure administration is doing what's policy, and if it's not, then we either fix policy or we fix administration, but something has to go, and so you're looking for those misalignments. But I would like Sean and Holly, as we continue those discussions, to think about from a trustee role, do we need our vision in these documents? Was that something that we've talked about as a board, and we have a vision, and it's not being clearly identified for our community or for the Board of Trustees? And if it needs to be memorialized in here, great. And if it doesn't, if we're doing overreach as a board, and it really shouldn't be policy, and it's not clean, I would like you to at least say, you know what, here's why other districts might not do it, or here's what we suggest, why it needs to be an admin or regulation, because that helps the board stay clean on where we're going to direct. Because when I'm looking at things that are coming up before our district, like I will get out my 2 very old binders and then I will go look online, but this helps me kind of look at things, and I feel like this is a tool for our community as well. They might not look at it as often, but I still want it to be have that question of what's our board vision and is in here.
I have a question about this policy because it is unique. I think when I looked at this a couple of years ago, I could only find maybe one other district that had this policy, and I'm curious to know the history behind it, if anybody here.
It was here when I got here.
Yeah. We have to do some inquiry with, yeah. No one has a tale or a story? Okay.
No, I just found do you say GBB? Is that it? No, for communications, okay, that's fine.
And there are very few districts that have a GBB local. And we used to have a standard policy that we no longer recommend for inclusion, and it was really about who addressed the press and that sort of thing, which is more administrative and within board ops.
I found one more. GNC local, it wasn't last time it was touched is in 1992. It has to deal with student teachers, and I think with the whole grow your own program we have, our student teachers in the classroom, again, policy hasn't been updated since 1992.
And that's when I was recommending for deletion, because it's a policy that we recommended when we created the manual that isn't necessary to include in policy anymore.
So I think in 2017, the count was we had 299 legal policies. We had 163 local policies. So we'll see where all the count kind of balances after
And
this.
about 80, I can't remember, 88 were unique out of the 180.
So, wow.
I think it's around 80, let's say 80, 88, 85.
We Leander weighed that thing. And maybe it needs to happen, but again, I think it's a good time for us to all be having that discussion. We talked about committees, the district planning committee. I know that one's going to get some more in-depth review, and I think kind of the updates. We mentioned that too, Sean, with SHAC, because legal had made so many changes, and then that would also impact our mental health and wellness policies that we have. We talked about the mental health and wellness curriculum. So when you bring back to board, sometimes these policies can get siloed out. So you might bring us back like a chunk and go, oh, all this can happen, and then we'll bring back the ones we worked on a little longer, and then it leaves maybe some of the ones that needed a lot of work towards the end. But for I could see SHAC being one where it would be helpful for us to know where are all the pieces running, so we can keep that package of how if it's in policy in several different areas, where is it at? So, all right. Board members, any other questions or things that you need through this process? All right. Eric, will you wrap us up, or Sean or Holly, on kind of what next steps look like?
As I mentioned, I'm going to take this information and begin to work on the recommendations and the drafts. And my hope and my goal is to get this back to you get this back to the administration before the end of May. We are in the midst of preparing for Update 120, which I'm heavily involved in. So I would like to get it all done before we begin to edit district's policies as part of that update. So that's my goal. It is April the 12th. So hope to have it to the district before the beginning of June and hopefully the end of May.
All right, board members, if there's no other questions, we'll move on to closed session. It is 8:45. You're excited about that, I bet. And we are moving into closed session. No?
Well, only if there's something we need. We posted it just in case, but we don't have anything specific unless there is something.
Told we had something specific. So let me look at my attorneys. Do you have something specific for close tonight?
Nothing that has to be discussed this evening.
Okay.
In fact, I'm waiting on a couple more pieces of information to fully respond to some of the inquiries that we've gotten.
That works. So then we don't need to go into closed session. We can spend the next 30 minutes talking about board debrief. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Because I'm seeing computers already closed down, please do. Those resources are helpful. Fill that out, though, sometime before we have our next meeting. And don't forget to fill out the dot on the wall. I know at our team of 8, though, we're going to pull it out and we're going to look at it and we'll have some type of conversation on it. It's a continuous improvement tool, and I just got to see some amazing teachers in our district talk about how much they love their continuous improvement tools and how it's making a difference. So it's kind of fun to be able to tell people, yeah, your board does it too. It's not just y'all, your board's using it. There are no other items before the board this evening, so it is 8:46 and we are hereby adjourned.